worse as the months rolled on. The only defense was to keep drinking water, keep swallowing salt pills, keep sweating, and keep swabbing antiseptic cream on the dry, chapped skin behind their testicles. The men grumbled and bitched about the conditions, as was a grunt's right. The rest of the men had by now squeezed into the Humvee and were tossing their cups into the front seat for Corporal Ambrose to fill. He poured out the heavily sugared brew and handed back the cups. The men threw it down quickly, scalding their tongues, swearing. Alpha Company hadn't lost a man, not even a scratch, since their deployment to Iraq over a year ago. Not many units could say that. The United Nations force to which the Marine Brigade was attached was taking a pounding from the insurgents, but Alpha Company had been careful, and they'd been lucky, so far. The patrol about to be concluded was not unlike so many others, uneventful. They'd been given several blocks of poor residential area to scour, tasked to search for and confiscate weapons. None had been seized, but everyone knew the place was still awash with them. Old AK-47s, pistols, rocket-propelled grenades, even MP5s and American M16s, because every time there was a wedding or a national soccer victory or a massive bomb blast somewhere, the guns came out and began banging away at the sky in support. Aside from anything else, the slugs always came back to Earth, and when they did, they were every bit as lethal as aimed rounds fired from the shoulder. Casualties and deaths resulted more often than not. Baghdad was like an insane spaghetti western. Sergeant Scott called it a couscous western on crack. "Okay, let's head on back to the ranch," said Scott. The driver didn't need to be told twice, and he eased some boot pressure onto the accelerator pedal. The Humvee moved off, its tires crunching over the road surface littered with pulverized concrete, gravel, and bits of bomb casing, this having been the scene of a recent minor skirmish. Scott watched the road pass by through a hole in the door, one of many drilled by shrapnel fragments collected on previous patrols when the vehicle had been in use with another unit. The motion and the heat were vaguely hypnotizing, and Scott's thoughts drifted to the prospect of a shower when they reached the relative safety of the compound. Occasional mortars and homemade rockets were routinely lobbed in over the walls, but they only rarely claimed lives. These were just something to put up with, something you were aware of, like the flies and the heat. But having a shower, letting the cool waters wash away the sweat and the grime and the goddamn sand, that was something to look forward to. The four-vehicle convoy snaked through the tan dwelling so compressed together that the air itself seemed to have been squeezed from the narrow road. Scott heard Ambrose say, "What the fuck?" and the words snapped him out of the daydream. "Did you take a wrong turn, Specialist?" Ambrose asked the driver. The Humvee was forced to stop because the blackened carcass of a vehicle ahead blocked the way. "No, Corporal. I'm just retracing our steps on the GPS. Unless the fucking gadget's lying. This is the way we come in for sure." There was barely enough room in the lane to turn around. The four Humvees reversed back down the street into an intersection and moved off in the one remaining direction available. Moments later, the Marine Patrol burst into the open space beside the wide gray river. Free from the shadows, the sun's heat radiated off the walls of the buildings and into the cabin. Corporal Ambrose looked past the driver out his window and scoped the Tigris beyond. It was nothing like the Mississippi that rolled majestically past his town back home, through lush green countryside. He was about to comment on this when the front of the vehicle suddenly imploded. In fact, the Humvee stopped as if hit by a massive punch. Steam and smoke billowed from under the buckled hood, while on the road a pool of oil spread rapidly beneath the engine like blood pumping from an arterial wound. The soldier behind the wheel began screaming when he realized his legs were bleeding profusely, the alloy firewall being about as effective as tissue paper against shrapnel. "Jesus fuck! Shit! Hey, what?" Out! Clear the vehicle," said Scott. The men evacuated fast and headed for cover behind the crippled Humvee, half carrying, half dragging the wounded driver. What had knocked out their vehicle? Was it a landmine or something else? The three remaining Humvees pulled up behind in a staggered line. The mounted machine guns were manned, and the men swept them through the arcs. But there wasn't anything to shoot at. The rest of Scott's patrol